My dad forced me to go to my favorite sister's wedding by threatening to stop paying for my college. They didn't know that I secretly graduated as the top of my class and now earn six figures. I was always the other daughter in my family. I knew it since I was 8 years old when my parents missed my school presentation because Giovanna, my older sister, had a mild cold. It's not like she had a fever or anything serious. She simply wasn't feeling well. While I recited my poem in front of an auditorium full of proud parents, my eyes scanned the audience searching for two faces that never appeared. Sometimes I wonder if there is an exact moment when children understand that they are not their parents' priority. For me, that day was etched in my memory as the first of many. Giovanna was always the star of the Martinez family. Extroverted, popular, and according to my parents, with a radiant personality. I was the opposite. Introverted, studious, and with what my father called a too serious personality, as if being responsible were a negative thing. "Ruth, why can't you be more like your sister?" was my mother's favorite phrase. I heard it so many times it almost became my middle name. I strived throughout high school to get perfect grades. When I brought home my first report card with all A's, my parents barely looked at it. "Good, Ruth, but those subjects are easy," my father said distractedly while checking his phone. "Besides, you were probably lucky with the exams." That same day, Giovanna arrived with a report card full of C's and my parents reacted as if she had won a Nobel Prize. "We're so proud of you, honey. We know how hard you try," exclaimed my mother, sticking Giovanna's mediocre report card on the refrigerator where it remained for months. Mine never made it there. As I grew older, the pattern became more evident. Giovanna dropped out of 3 different university programs, and each time my parents consoled her, saying she was still finding her way. Meanwhile, when I mentioned that I wanted to study finance and business intelligence, my father let out a laugh. "You in finance? That's for people with math and social skills. Better study something simpler," he declared, crushing my dream like it was a bothersome insect. But the worst wasn't their constant academic favoritism. The worst came in the form of a boy named Miguel. Miguel Alvarez was my first love. I met him in my senior year of high school, and for the first time someone seemed to really see me. For 6 months, I thought I had found someone who valued my intelligence and personality. My parents even seemed to approve of our relationship, constantly inviting him to dinner. What I didn't know was that they weren't inviting him for me. One day, I came home early and found Miguel kissing Giovanna on the living room sofa. My heart shattered, but what was truly devastating was what happened next. "I'm sorry, Rue, but your sister and I have a special connection," Miguel said without a hint of remorse. "You were always too boring." I expected my parents to be furious, to defend their youngest daughter, to at least feel some indignation. Instead, my mother said, "These things happen, Ruth. You can't blame anyone for following their feelings." My father added, "Giovanna and Miguel make a much more logical couple. They're both sociable people. You understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that I would never be a priority for them, that no matter how hard I tried, I would always be inferior to Giovanna. That night, while crying silently in my room, I made the decision that would change my life. I would go far, far away from there, and I would do it in secret. I applied to several universities, but I had my heart set on the University of Chicago, known for its excellent finance program. When I received my acceptance letter with a partial scholarship, I felt a mixture of euphoria and panic. The scholarship covered 70% of the tuition, but I still needed help with the rest and living expenses. When I gathered the courage to talk to my parents, their response was predictable. "Chicago? Impossible. It's too expensive and too far," my father declared. "We've already set aside money for you to study at the state university, as we always planned." "And Giovanna?" I asked, knowing the answer. "Your sister has different needs," my mother replied evasively. That night, I discovered they had paid the down payment on an apartment for Giovanna near the private university where she was pursuing her 4th degree, in addition to covering her full tuition. That's when I devised my plan. I lied to them. I told them I had been rejected from Chicago, and that I would study at the state university as they wanted. In reality, I rented a P.O. box where I received all my university correspondence, and worked part-time in a coffee shop to cover the expenses that my scholarship didn't reach. For 4 years, I lived a double life. My parents believed I was studying locally, and that my grades were acceptable. In reality, I was graduating with honors from one of the best universities in the country, making contacts and securing my financial future. On my graduation day, while my classmates celebrated with their families, I was alone. But I didn't feel sad. For the first time in my life, I felt that I had done something completely for myself and by myself, without seeking the approval that would never come. 2 weeks later, I received a job offer from a major consulting firm in New York. The starting salary, $100,000 per year plus bonuses. I almost fainted when I saw the numbers. Everything was going perfectly until I received that call that would change everything. My father, with his usual authoritarian tone, informed me that Giovanna was getting married in 3 months. It wasn't an invitation, it was an order. You have to come. It's your sister and it's an important day for the family, my father declared. I'm very busy with university and work. I tried to excuse myself. I don't give a damn about your excuses. If you don't come, I'll stop paying for your college. You've already cost us enough with your mediocre grades. I almost laughed at the irony of the situation. My father threatening me with something I no longer needed, unaware that his mediocre daughter now earned more in a year than he did in 3. I'll be there, I finally replied, making a decision that would change our family dynamic forever. What my parents didn't know was that I was about to return, but not as the Ruth they remembered. I would return transformed into someone they could no longer ignore. The flight to my hometown was torture. With every kilometer the plane advanced, I felt like I was going back in time, becoming the invisible Ruth Martinez again. Even dressed in my business suit and with my latest generation laptop, I felt like an imposter. During the flight, I checked my mother's messages, an endless list of tasks to help with Giovanna's wedding. Of course, because besides forcing me to attend, they expected me to be the bride's unpaid personal assistant. The perfect family needs the imperfect daughter to do the dirty work, I thought bitterly. My father was waiting for me at the airport with that perpetually disappointed expression he reserved exclusively for me. You're late, was his greeting after 3 years without seeing each other. The flight was delayed, Dad, I replied, showing him my phone with the airline notification. You always have excuses, he muttered, snatching the phone. He talked incessantly about how wonderful the wedding they were organizing was, Giovanna's bright future with Raul, and how lucky they were to finally have a real man in the family. Raul is an executive at a multinational, you know? He earns very well, not like those waitress jobs you get, he commented, unaware that my little job could buy his house 5 times over. I wanted to tell him the truth at that moment, but something stopped me. Part of me wanted to watch the whole spectacle before revealing my trump card. Upon arriving home, my mother hugged me briefly before bombarding me with instructions. Ruth, it's good that you arrived. I need you to go with Giovanna tomorrow for the final dress fitting, then pick up the centerpieces, and in the afternoon help with the remaining invitations. Mom, I just arrived after a 4-hour flight, I protested. Your sister has been planning this wedding for months while you were busy with whatever it is you do, she replied, making a dismissive gesture. It's the least you can do. Before I could respond, the front door burst open. Giovanna entered like a whirlwind, followed by a tall, arrogant-looking man I assumed was Raul, and by Miguel. My stomach clenched at the sight. 3 years had not erased the humiliation. Little sister, Giovanna shrieked, hugging me with false enthusiasm. It's so good you could take a break from whatever it is you're studying. Finance, I replied dryly. Oh, right that, she said dismissively. Look, let me introduce you to my future husband, Raul. Raul looked me up and down with a smile that made my hair stand on end. So you're the famous younger sister, he said condescendingly. Giovanna has told me all about you. All? I asked, looking directly at my sister. Well, that you're studying something related to numbers and that you work in a coffee shop, Giovanna replied with a giggle. Something like that, I murmured. Just like you too, Miguel, I added, equally opportunistic. My mother quickly intervened. Miguel is the best man. He's been a great support to Giovanna and Raul. I'm not surprised, I commented. Miguel has always known where it's convenient to be. The tension was palpable, but my family, expert at ignoring anything uncomfortable related to me, quickly changed the subject. Raul just gave Giovanna a new car, my father announced proudly. It's It's a BMW 3 Series, Giovanna added, showing me the keys. Raul says a future Mrs. Mendoza should have a car befitting her status. I noticed something strange about Raul. His constant need to look at his phone, the way he avoided giving details about his work, and a certain nervousness when his family was mentioned. Small warning signs that, as a financial analyst, I had learned to detect. During dinner, I listened patiently to the extravagant details of the wedding. Imported flowers, a designer dress, a live band, and a reception for 300 guests at the most exclusive country club in the city. It must cost a fortune, I casually commented. For our princess wedding, no expense is too great, my father replied, looking adoringly at Giovanna. It was then that they mentioned the wedding gift, the down payment for a house in the most expensive part of the city. How can you afford all this? I asked directly. The last time we talked, you said there wasn't enough money to help me with college. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. They're different situations, my mother replied evasively. We've made some financial adjustments, added my father. That night, while everyone was sleeping, I quietly went downstairs to get a glass of water in my father's study. The desk light was still on. Curious, I peeked in and saw several documents scattered around. Normally I wouldn't snoop, but a familiar logo caught my attention. It was from the bank where we had the family mortgage. I quickly reviewed the papers and my blood ran cold. My parents had remortgaged the house, this time for an astronomical sum. They had risked everything for Giovanna's wedding and the down payment on her new house. The next day, I reluctantly accompanied Giovanna to her final dress fitting. While she strutted in front of the mirror, I observed her phone, which she had carelessly left on a chair. The screen lit up with a message. Love, the kids miss you. When are you coming back to Monterey? It's been 2 weeks. The sender wasn't Raul. Intrigued, I began to investigate using my skills and some contacts from my job. I discovered something shocking. Raul Mendoza had another family in Monterey, a wife of 5 years and 2 young children who knew nothing about Giovanna or the wedding. Worse, Raul had a history of romantic scams. He gained the trust of wealthy women, or in this case, parents willing to go into debt, took their money and disappeared. I had to warn my family. That same night, I gathered my parents in the living room. Raul is not who he says he is, I began, showing them the evidence I had compiled. He has another family in Monterey and a history of scams. I expected shock, gratitude for having uncovered the truth, perhaps even an acknowledgement of my intelligence. Instead, my father yelled in anger. You've always been jealous of your sister, always trying to ruin her happiness. This is low even for you. It's not lies. I have proof, I insisted, showing them the documents. Falsified documents, my father declared. Raul warned us about this. He said you might try something like this because you've always envied Giovanna. He warned you about me? I asked, stunned. He told us that at your university you caused problems by making up stories about your professors and classmates, my mother explained. He said you would try to sabotage the wedding because you can't stand to see your sister happy. The pieces fit. Raul had gotten ahead of me, sowing doubts about me before I could expose the truth about him. A classic manipulation strategy. And they believed a man they'd known for less than a year instead of their own daughter. You believed him over me? I asked, my voice breaking. We know our daughter, my father replied coldly. And we know what you're capable of when you're not the center of attention. At that moment, I understood that no matter how much evidence I presented, they would never believe me because they never wanted to believe in me. I left the house that night and checked into a hotel. For the next few days, I watched from afar as the wedding preparations continued. Giovanna, oblivious to her fiancé's true nature, floated in a cloud of toxic happiness. My parents, proud and blind, spent money they didn't have on a celebration that would end in disaster. And I waited, knowing that the truth always comes out, even when no one wants to see it. The wedding day dawned radiant, as if the universe was conspiring to give Giovanna the perfect day that, according to my parents, she had always deserved. From my hotel room I watched the clock. 9 a.m. The ceremony was scheduled for 6 p.m. I had decided to attend, not out of filial obligation, but to witness the inevitable disaster. I knew it sounded malicious, but after years of being the villain in a story I never wrote, For once I wanted to be present when the truth was revealed. I put on my best suit, a dark blue Armani I had bought with my first quarterly bonus. I applied my makeup with precision, put on the diamond earrings I gave myself when I got my promotion, and completed the outfit with low-heeled pumps that cost more than my father's first car. If I was going to witness the collapse of the family illusion, I would do it looking impeccable. At 5:30 p.m., I arrived at the church. Guests were already entering, all dressed in their finest clothes. I recognized aunts, cousins, and family friends I hadn't seen in years. No one asked about my absence. No one was surprised to see me. It was as if my existence was so irrelevant that my presence or absence went completely unnoticed. I entered the church and sat in the third row on the bride's side. My mother, busy giving last-minute orders to the florists, barely noticed my arrival. My father was in a side room with Giovanna, probably giving her one of his speeches about how proud he was of her. Miguel, in his role as best man, hovered near the altar. Our eyes met and he quickly looked away. Coward, I thought. 6 p.m. The music started. The guests took their seats. 6:15 p.m. People started murmuring. There was no sign of the groom. 6:30 p.m. I saw my father leave the side room and speak hurriedly with the wedding planner. His face reflected concern. 6:45 p.m. My mother approached me, something she rarely did voluntarily. Have you seen Raoul? She asked, her voice tense. Not since yesterday, I replied honestly. 7 p.m. The priest announced that there would be a slight delay in the ceremony. 7:30 p.m. The truth I tried to warn them about finally fell like a meteor on my family. Raoul wouldn't be appearing. Not only that, but he had disappeared with the money for the down payment on the house, which my parents had deposited into a joint account with him as a surprise gift for Giovanna. The reception was hastily cancelled. The guests left amidst murmurs and compassionate looks. Giovanna, still in her $5,000 wedding dress, sobbed uncontrollably in the side room while my mother tried to comfort her. I remained seated in the church, watching as the fantasy was dismantled, as the flowers that cost thousands were removed, as the red carpet was rolled up. I didn't feel joy at my sister's pain, nor did I feel pity. Just a strange sense of conclusion, as if I was witnessing the inevitable end of a poorly told story. 3 days later, the storm that followed the failed wedding reached its climax. My parents discovered that Raoul had emptied the joint account where they had deposited $50,000 for the down payment on the house. Not only that, but he had used my father's financial information to apply for several loans in his name. We were in the family room, the atmosphere heavy with despair and regret. Giovanna hadn't left her room in days. My mother seemed to have aged 10 years in 72 hours. We're going to lose the house, my father said in a defeated voice, something I never thought I'd hear. We can't pay the loans and the second mortgage. Can't you ask any relatives for help? I asked, knowing the answer. We already tried, my mother replied. No one has that amount of money available. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken expectations. Finally, my father looked directly at me, something unusual. Ruth, he began, swallowing his pride with difficulty. I know we haven't been. That I haven't been the best father to you. What an understatement, I thought. But we're family, he continued. And right now we need your help. Any amount you can lend us from your work at the coffee shop or your university savings. We'll pay you back. I promise. It was the moment I had imagined many times, my family needing me, recognizing my worth, even if out of desperation. But reality had a different flavor than my fantasies. I didn't feel triumphant or satisfied, just a deep sadness for all the lost time and love. I have something to tell you, I announced, getting up. And I think you should sit down. I told them everything about my admission to the University of Chicago, about my graduation with honors, about my job in New York and my 6-figure salary. I showed them photos, emails, my university diploma, which I had brought with me anticipating this moment. Their faces went from disbelief to astonishment and finally to something I had never seen directed at me. Respect. Why didn't you ever tell us? My mother asked in a trembling voice. When? When you asked me about my studies. When you showed interest in my career. When you were proud of my achievements. I replied without hostility, just stating facts. We could have helped you, my father murmured. I let out a short laugh. Helped me? You remortgaged the house to pay for Giovanna's wedding while telling me there was no money for my education. You let me believe I wasn't smart enough for a career in finance. You celebrated when the boy I loved left me for my sister. We were blind, my father admitted, something I never thought I'd hear him say. Now, he continued. My mother reached out to stop him. I could help you, I said slowly. I have the money to pay off the second mortgage and the fraudulent loans. I saw hope light up their faces. But I won't, I concluded calmly. The hope vanished as quickly as it had appeared. What? My father exclaimed incredulously. You're going to let us lose our house? Your own family? No, I replied. You're going to lose the house because of your own decisions. Because of years of favoritism. Because of ignoring all the warning signs about Raul. Because of not believing me when I showed you proof that he was a con man. I stood up and grabbed my bag. For my whole life you made me feel like I wasn't enough, that my accomplishments didn't matter, that my worth as a person depended on your approval, which never came. It took me years of therapy to understand that the problem was never me. It was you and the toxic dynamic you created. But we're your family, my mother insisted, tears streaming down her face. Family isn't just about sharing DNA, I replied. It's about respect, support, and unconditional love, things I never received in this house. I walked towards the door, but stopped for a moment. I don't wish you ill, I said sincerely. In fact, I hope this situation gives you the opportunity to reflect and grow as people and as parents. Maybe you can be the genuine support for Giovanna that you never were for me. You're leaving just like that? My father asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and a hint of reluctant respect. I left a long time ago, Dad. It's just that no one noticed. I walked out of that house for the last time, not with my heart full of resentment, but with the peace of someone finally freed from a burden they never should have carried. I didn't feel guilty for not helping them financially. Sometimes the best way to love someone is to let them face the consequences of their actions. 3 months later, I received an email from Giovanna. They had lost the house and moved into a small apartment. My parents had to come out of early retirement to work again. She had found a job as a receptionist and was, for the first time in her life, earning her own living. I understand now why you did what you did, she wrote. I'm not asking for forgiveness or blaming you for not helping us. I just wanted you to know that, although it came in the worst possible way, this experience is changing us all. Maybe someday, if you want, we could try to build the sister relationship we never had. I didn't answer immediately. I saved the email and let my emotions settle. Weeks later, I sent a brief reply. Real change takes time. Maybe someday. For now, I'm glad to know you're all learning to stand on your own 2 feet. That's the best gift I could have given you. Even if you don't fully understand it yet. As I sent the email, I looked out the window of my new apartment in Manhattan. The view of the skyline reminded me of everything I had achieved on my own. Against all odds and expectations. I didn't regret anything. Not hiding my success, not revealing the truth, not refusing to financially rescue my family. Because in the end, it wasn't about revenge or poetic justice. It was about dignity, about setting healthy boundaries, about valuing myself when no one else did. And that perhaps was the most valuable lesson I ever received from the family that always made me feel invisible. That the most important validation is the one we give ourselves. Someday maybe there would be room for forgiveness and reconciliation, but for now I was content with the peace of knowing that I was finally visible, not to them but to myself. And so ends my story. If I learned anything on this journey, it's that respect and true love are not begged for. They are earned. Sometimes the family we need is not the one we were born into, but the one we build with people who truly see and value us. Setting boundaries is not selfish, it's self-love. And that self-love is the best gift we can give ourselves when no one else is willing to value us.